Hi, Year 12. Welcome to part two. We're going to take off where we left off on the last one. As you know, we are still right in the middle of stanza one. So we had looked at whom no compassion flees or makes their feet sore on the alleys cobbled with their brothers. Now we're going to look at the front line withers, but they are troops who fade, not flowers. For poets tearful fulling, men gaps for filling. Okay, these are metaphorically rich lines here. So we firstly hear the front line withers. This is a metaphor of flowers, and he's relating the front line itself to flowers, and it's something that's withering, dying, passing away. So you get the idea that the front line is dying. But they are troops who fade, not flowers. So this extended metaphor continues here. Again, we get in this idea of insensibility that comes in with the word fade. Here it's when we get through our analysis, and you're going to see links to other parts of the poem with this word here. The troops are fading in that they are becoming insensible. They are losing their compassion. They're not flowers. They are wilting like flowers, fading like flowers that wither. But it's a metaphorical death here. This is the death of their emotions. And there's for poets tearful fulling. This, in one sense, refers to Owen's own sentimental attitude towards what he conceives, suggesting that Owen is compassionate. This line for poets tearful fulling, it actually it's quite loaded, and it's got layers of meaning. Obviously, it's ironic. Owen is a poet, and he is writing poetry, and yet he's mocking poets. But here, I think we can look at that he's being critical of the poets who have come before him, who have glorified war, have portrayed it as something heroic, and what he is seeing is something in complete contrast to that. And notice then the lines of men gaps for filling. This here is the metonymy, men gaps for filling, and losses, which follows on the next line. It dehumanizes. So this is actually several layers as well. So it does dehumanize the men. There's, again, like in Anthem for Doomed Youth, there's this preoccupation with the loss of ceremony and the loss of the reverence. It's kind of like, flinging them into the wagon that we've got in Dolce, and the cattles, again, the passing cattles of Anthem for Doomed Youth. And there's a bitterness here that is coming through, particularly with who might have fought longer, but no one bothers. There's a definite cynicism there and bitterness that comes through in that particular line. The other thing is, it does again allude to the Beatitudes and Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And so this here is a biblical allusion, again, to the Beatitudes, but used ironically. In this poem, the repetition of the happy is a suggestion that the happiness is emptiness in this. These are men who cannot be filled. That blessedness is not there. That the happiness is empty. They are just men who are filled with gaps that need to be filled. They can't be filled, as in the words of Matthew, shall be filled. And so the happiness itself becomes insensible here. It's a really important thing to note, because it starts to become a lexical chain that flows through the poem, of this idea of emptiness and this lack of feeling that is represented by happiness. So here we've got the gaps for filling, and when we go down, cease feeling here, dullness, shelling, used, it's got a pun in it, when we shell something, we're making it empty. There, and it goes on further. And as we go through the poem, we'll see more of them. And everywhere through it, we have these lexical chains of emptiness. Also, with the fade up here, this carries through further down the poem, where all right, I've lost the spot. Hang on. So here in stanza 4, we've got taciturn, dusk, long, huge and night. There's a suggestion here in these lines of something hidden, a shadow or a lack of clarity, and that links nicely with fade up here, this idea that there's a lack of clarity. It's not distinct. Something's faded. It's not sharp like it was previously. And so they become lexical chains. Okay, so men gaps for filling, losses. Again, the other layer of meaning is that as each man dies, we just send more. We just, as soon as there's one loss, we send one more to replace them. And so there's layers and layers of meaning going on here. And as I said, it links to Anthem for a Doomed Youth quite nicely. We've also we've got these, where we read it in its entirety. Notice we've got this colon here, that it's to tell us that these lines here follow directly on from that, and they're expanding on this line here, men's gap for filling. So we have men gaps for filling, losses, who might have fought longer, but no one bothers. There's a deeply bitter tone there in that final line, and there's this tone or this mood of utter hopelessness that comes out in this stanza, which is all about compassion and the loss of compassion. Okay, moving on into our next stanza. Again, as I said before, that lexical chain of emptiness and feeling continues. So, and some cease feeling, dullness, best souls, shelling, all of these lines together continue that idea of emptiness. Happy is he who is empty and devoid of feeling. So it's all used ironically. Stanza 2 is about the man who stops fearing death, the soldier who stops fearing death and loses feeling. So we've had the loss of compassion, and now it goes further into a complete loss of feeling. So, and some cease feeling. Notice that the stanza starts with the conjunction and, which is suggesting that we are flowing straight on from stanza 1 into stanza 2. And actually, before we do that, I'm just going to go back up to this line here, for poets tearful fooling. The other thing to remember is that Owen did die in the war. The poets of the war, most of them died, most of the poets of the First World War, and poetry was used substantially by poets in the First World War. We have a lot of poetry that came out of it. Siegfried Sassoon, Rupert Brooke. Rupert Brooke was a pre-war poet who was very patriotic, and wrote about, if I should die, think only this of me, there is some far foreign field that shall ever be England. And Owen's poetry is a complete contrast to Rupert Brooke's. But even though we have this irony about, he's mocking the poets and who have come before him for their glorification of war, it's also the idea that poetry will live when the poet no longer does. Owen died in the war. His poetry is still studied 100 years on, and these ideas that he's representative still live on today. Okay, so back to this stanza. And some cease feeling, even themselves, all for themselves. Dullness best solves the tense and doubt of shelling, and chance's strange arithmetic comes simpler than the reckoning of their shilling. They keep no check on armies' decimation. It's a shorter stanza, and we have the word dullness. The word dullness comes through the poem quite a bit. It goes with that word fade that we had earlier. the idea that we're losing the color, the brightness, the sharpness. Okay, so and some cease feeling even themselves or for themselves. So they've either lost feeling for others, or they've even lost the feeling for themselves. Like there's this idea that they don't care about anything. It's all gone. Everything's gone. Okay, so coming down to dullness best solves. The tease and doubt of shelling. This is personified. The dullness itself becomes personified, and it goes on to here, and chance is strange arithmetic. Chance, it's a game of chance. It's saying that if there's nothing strategic in this war at all, it's just a game of chance whether you win or lose, whether you live or die. As we know, we've talked about the context that in the First World War, the average lifespan was 6 weeks. For anyone in the trenches. And so it's just a matter of chance when this is going to happen. But through the personification of dullness best solves the tease and doubt of shelling, the dullness is contrasted against the tease and doubt of shelling. The tease is the torture that the soldiers are going through and the tension that they have to live with. The shelling, the doubt of shelling, double-loaded line. It's like the shelling of the 5 and 9s in Dolce Decorum Est. This the fact that when is it going to stop? When does it stop? It might stop for a moment, and then it starts up again. But also, as we said before, shelling is used. Has double layers of meaning, and it's also that pun to suggest that it's again making empty. And chance is strange arithmetic. It's this idea that it's just so random. Who's going to die? There's no way of working out death on the battlefield. Why does one soldier die and why does one live? And it's this idea that the battlefield goes against the laws of probability or defies the laws of probability. How does one soldier just keep surviving where everybody else around him keeps dying? And so here it's a loaded line about that randomness of war. Comes simpler than the reckoning of their shilling. Now we've got a new lexical chain here: reckoning, shilling, decimation. So reckoning and shilling. It's a monetary terms. And it's aligning the it's a bet. It's easier to work out. He's saying that it's easier to accept the randomness of the battlefield than to actually try and work out how it's going to work. The reckoning of their shilling. So it's about this gamble, and trying to work out just who's going to die. It's just not possible. And they said they keep no check on armies' decimation. That's a really strong word, decimation. Then there's this idea that no one is thinking about how many people are dying or how many men are being killed. It's just not being thought about at all. It's also an allusion to the ancient Roman tradition of killing every 10th member of a legion if the legion disgraced itself in any way. It's he's got a lot of allusions and intertextual references in this poem. So this stanza is about that loss of feeling, no longer fearing death and going numb to it. You can link this one to the next war, this particular stanza, which, in that one they're sitting beside death and laughing with death, and death is present constantly. And again, they have to laugh with death because it's so random. They can't pick the pattern. Okay, I'm going to stop it there and then do the next stanza in another video.